Thank you all for making the time today for this webinar during lunch. We appreciate you making the time. My name is Jacob Elkish and I'm a partner in RSM and I lead our risk consulting division here in Brisbane. I specialise in enterprise risk management type services, and more recently I've been assisting my clients through the COVID-19 challenges, particularly with pandemic response planning and also business continuity management. So we're very much looking forward to presenting to you today, but before I commence my presentation, I'll hand over to Roger for a quick introduction.
Thank you, Jacob. Much appreciated. So welcome everyone. Roger Darville-Stevens is my name. I'm the National Head of Fraud and Forensic Services at RSM. I lead a team of multidisciplinary subject matter experts in this sort of area that covers a whole range of dealing with fraud, corruption and workplace misconduct matters. And the multidisciplinary team includes former law enforcement or police like myself, as well as forensic accountants, team members with experience in internal audit, internal controls, forensic IT, data analytics, etc. My own background is of a policeman for 12 years, including the fraud squad as a detective, and then working in the private sector and in professional services. I've got an MBA, Masters in Criminology, and Certified Fraud Examiner and Licensed Investigator. I'll hand back to you, Jacob. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. So I'll just, the first slide really takes us through what we're looking to cover today. Firstly, we want to provide an overview of disruption-related risks, and then move on to, move on to the importance of business continuity management in light of COVID-19. We'll go through some of the fundamentals of business continuity management. So I won't get too technical in that in terms of developing BCPs and going through a business impact assessment. But essentially the intention of that is really to provide awareness of the full sort of business continuity management process. And a lot of organisations have been sort of forced into activating business continuity type events. So that's really the intention of that. And then we'll move into the more, I guess, valuable area, which is where everyone is at now with recovery strategies, risk management of those recovery strategies, and looking at those controls and factoring in time-based scenario monitoring. Given that this is a webinar, we would like to make this as interactive as possible. So we will have time for some questions throughout, and then provide answers at the completion of our presentation. And also we've got poll questions for some of the slides, so I encourage you to participate in those. So an overview of disruption-related risk. So disruption-related risk arises from anticipated or unanticipated events that can impact an organisation's standard operating processes and cause immediate and long-term damage if no action is taken. As a result of that, it's critical to have contingency plans in place and processes to respond and stabilise immediate impact of high-risk disruptive events, ensure critical business functions can recover and continue, facilitate the recovery and return to a realistic and desired operating condition as soon as possible, and capitalise on opportunities. That's one area that I guess is not looked much in detail when going through business continuity management, because there are opportunities that arise after a disruption event. So these are things that need to be considered through contingency planning and business continuity management. So since COVID-19, most organisations have been actually forced to conduct BCM activities, regardless if you've had a BCP to begin with. So this has been to prioritise health and wellbeing of your employees, to comply with actual federal and state social distancing requirements, fulfil customer agreements and additional requirements, continue operating conditions to the highest degree, and obviously adjust to the volatile foreign and domestic economic conditions. So the next few slides talk about the fundamentals. So before I get to that, I guess I wanted to ask a question to the attendees, and it really gives me an indication of how quickly I can get through the next slides or not, but it just provides me an understanding. So the question is, prior to COVID-19, did you have a business continuity plan? The answers are yes, and it was activated effectively. Yes, however, it required significant amendment as it did not adequately address the pandemic risk event, or no. So I'll just pause to provide you some time to answer, and then we'll see the results. So we'll stop now and collate the results. So we've got yes, 35%, and it was activated effectively, which is great. Yes, however, significant amendment some amendment was required, 47%, and no, 20%. So it's a good sort of cross section all across. So it means that the next few slides I can get through relatively quickly. But again, if you do have questions, feel free to provide a question in the answer box. Sorry, in the question. Sorry. And we can answer those at the end. So the fundamentals of BCM. BCM has been thrown around in recent thought leadership, and it's been heightened in terms of a priority in response to COVID-19. So again, the fundamentals, I won't get into developing a BCP and a crisis management plan or pandemic response plan, because obviously that's a bit technical, and I can get back to you on some of those questions associated with that. But really what I wanted to show you is the full business continuity management process. So you've got a crisis management plan, a pandemic response plan, a business continuity plan, and a disaster recovery plan. Whilst they're separate plans, the crisis management plan and the pandemic response plan can effectively be one plan, but obviously the BCP and the DRP are separate. The most common sort of pitfall I do see when I work with organisations is treating these plans in isolation. So whilst they're separate documents, they need to be used in conjunction with each other when an event, a disruption event occurs. So your crisis management plan and your pandemic response plan are really to stabilise and protect your people and your assets. Your business continuity plan is focused on continuing your critical functions, and also assisting with recovering to get to a point of normal operations. And your disaster recovery plan supports your business continuity plan and your crisis management plan and pandemic response plan. So I'll show you the next diagram. So just to quickly go through this diagram, it shows the relationship between activity level, time following a disruption event commencing, and the different activities that need to be conducted. So as soon as an event commences, obviously there's a high activity level to stabilize. So that's where your crisis management plan comes into play, and you focus on protecting your asset and your people. Also, there's a high activity level with continuing with critical business functions. So that's where your business continuity plan should be set, and you activate that to ensure that your critical business functions can continue following the disruption event. And then once you've reached a level of stabilization is when you start putting more activity level focus into the recovery of your operations. So really, that really shows the relationship and how your crisis management plan and your business continuity plan sometimes may be activated at the same time. So I'll go through the stabilization and the continual critical functions and recovery strategies in the next few slides. But essentially, this is really, I just really wanted to show that there is an extensive process, and you do rely on using these plans dependently on each other. So a common misconception is just thinking all you need is a business continuity plan that should cover everything. So that's something that I wanted to get across. So as far as stabilizing activities, so there are actions undertaken to limit the deterioration early in a disruption event. So that's, again, protection of your people, your assets, removing critical resources from harm, preventing the spread of further harm, or salvaging assets and or resources to prevent further harm. Continuing critical business functions. Logically, it's aimed at making sure your critical functions can continue when a disruption event occurs. So that's developing workarounds and alternatives, work methods, or changing locations. So most organisations now, after COVID-19, are now working from home, and hopefully continuing your critical functions through that mechanism. Another strategy is deploying alternative information and communication technology infrastructure. So if you do have a backup data center, if one location is disrupted, it's about activating that backup data center, and then adopting alternative logistics, including new possible suppliers and customers. And recovery actions is probably more the focus of the next few slides, and this is where most organisations are at now. So hopefully you've stabilised, hopefully you've got your critical functions running. So now we're focused on what are our recovery strategies? How do we move towards what was normal, and how do we make sure the risks with these recovery strategies and the risks with the workarounds in continuing the critical functions are being monitored, are being mitigated, and you allow for flexibility to respond for future changes. So some recovery strategies include redesigning work methods and repurposing service offerings, renegotiating supply logistics and customer arrangements, a strategic communication approach with your key stakeholders established. So essentially, through this process, by implementing strategies, by implementing workarounds, there are new risks that presents itself to organisations. So it doesn't stop once you've got a VCP, once you've got these recovery strategies. It doesn't stop there. There needs to be continued effort to continually review what you're doing and how you're monitoring it. So since COVID-19, organisations have implemented a variety of rapid response recovery strategies. So working from home is one, which is common to all, but that's basically by government force, diversifying current suppliers or sourcing alternative suppliers, reduction in non-essential expenditure, and the furloughing of employees. So with these strategies that may be working adequately at the moment, it's important that you are managing those risks associated with those strategies. So I do believe I have a poll question here as well. So we'll just wait for that. So the question is, has your business assessed the risks associated with your chosen recovery strategies? And have you implemented additional risk mitigation strategies to treat these risks? So we'll see the results now. So the answer, predominantly we have informally considered the associated risks, 57%, 36% we've assessed the associated risk and implemented additional risk mitigation strategies, which is good, and only 7% no, which is actually not bad given the split. So, and I guess the B, in terms of informally, that's common, and I guess most through a situation like this where things are constantly changing, you're constantly thinking about risks, which is good. I guess what my advice today is that you start putting things down formally and start working on controls to mitigate some of these risks, and then I'll bring in factoring in time-based scenario, because essentially we don't know how long this is going to go for, so you need to prepare for the worst. So I'll quickly go through some of the risks with some of these strategies. These aren't an exhaustive list of risks, but essentially these are just some ones that I guess you can think about. So working remotely from home, obviously there's the risk of employee health and well-being. What are the controls you have in place to mitigate the risk of harm? Increased cybersecurity vulnerabilities. With everyone working from home using personal networks, there are additional cybersecurity risks. There's also a social engineering type risk, because your employees are out of the office and they're receiving more emails from CFOs. So as far as phishing, that'll increase. So things to consider: productivity and efficiency losses. This is one thing that will start to come up. Everyone's been working from home for a good 3-4 weeks now. How are you monitoring performance? How are you monitoring productivity? Have your performance targets changed? Has your performance measuring changed? These are things that you need to be on top of and ensure that you are monitoring that productivity. Fraud, corruption, that is going to be covered by Roger Darvas-Stevens in more detail. But again, another risk associated from working remotely from home. Sorry about this. Diversifying current suppliers or sourcing alternative suppliers. So that's where you recognise you have some supplier dependencies. So you've done the right thing and diversified your suppliers or selected an alternative supplier. What are the risks associated with that strategy? One, potentially violation of existing contractual supply agreement, or if you're in the public sector, you're breaching government procurement rules. Have you gone off a panel? Have you followed the procurement process? Again, you're probably on top of these things, but it's important to flesh these out to ensure that you have formally identified these things and you are managing these things. Lack of continuous review of suppliers' ability to supply given the increased demand. So you've switched to a new supplier. How many other organisations have switched to that supplier? Can that supplier meet your demand? Have you done your due diligence on that supplier as far as their business continuity management processes? So these are, again, things you need to continually monitor. And then the third one is in relation to your procurement. Are you overbuying supplies? Is it based on your customer demands, or is it more in a panic? Things to consider. So reductions in non-essential expenditures. So there's the potential business risk associated with that is lack of capitalising on market opportunities by reducing all your expenditure. Are you losing out on opportunities? Are you losing out on innovation and improvement opportunities? Again, obviously the focus is continuity, but the risk is you stop spending and potentially it causes more damage in the longer term. And then ongoing conflict in terms of what's essential, what's non-essential. So it's more a cultural thing. And then the last one is furloughing employees. So potential risk is you lose talented employees to competitors. You increase employee anxiety and fear, and potential accusations of preferential treatment. More a cultural side. How are you managing that risk? How are you controlling the message within the organisation? And then obviously potential violation of employment rights and privileges. That also has a reputational impact which needs to be considered. And nearly at the end, so Now I'll focus on time-based scenarios. So we talked about those risks, and it's about assessing those risks and reviewing. Because there is an uncertainty of time with COVID, it's important to look at that timeline. So the benefits of utilising time-based scenario monitoring includes the following: understanding of best and worst case impact on the organisation, the risks associated with chosen recovery strategies over time, escalation points for the development or implementation of new recovery strategies that are contingent on time. So I believe there's the last poll question here. The question is, has your organisation considered best case, moderate and worst case timeframes in their approach to business continuity management? And if so, how far into the future have you planned? Okay. So that's pretty spread out. So we've got 13% on the no, 1 to 2 months yes, 3 to 6, 42%, which is great. 6 to 12, 25%, which is again not too bad. So it's pleasing to hear that you are applying the uncertainty of this COVID disruption and planning for worst case scenario. So as far as time-based scenario monitoring, the intention is will your recovery strategies that are actually working now in the short term, will they be as effective in the medium term and then to the long term? So employee health and wellbeing, has your business identified all potential health and wellbeing requirements for its employees, and can this last for 6 months? That's a question you'll need to consider. So the sustainability of short-term workarounds. Can your recovery strategies that you've implemented, can they last up to 6 months? Is there a need for further investment in developing new recovery strategies and allocating task force to develop new recovery strategies? So these are things that potentially, when you're looking medium term and long term, you'll need to start thinking about. Your strategic objectives, if this goes for 12 months, are your strategic objectives still relevant? Does it need to be reviewed? Does your strategic direction need to be reassessed? And then obviously there's the financial sustainability, considering the sustained impact of pandemic on the national economy if the disruption continues 12 months. So while you might be all right if this goes 12 months, but what about your customers that in the short term you thought weren't assessed as a high risk? So there may be a customer that will survive a 1 to 2 month shutdown. What about a 12-month shutdown? That's where you need to start thinking about the impact and will your recovery strategies get you through the time-based scenario monitoring. So as far as resources, these are sort of better practice if you do want to get into a bit more detail of the methodology in developing these plans, or feel free to ask any specific questions, but these are just standards and resources that you can refer to if you want to sort of circle back on anything that I've said. And that concludes my section of this presentation. I'll hand over now to Roger to talk about the fraud and corruption and cybersecurity and fraud type risks associated with COVID-19.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jacob. That was awesome. Can everybody hear me? I hope there's a thumbs up there. Feel free in the Q&A to do a thumbs up. I just want to talk about what I'm going to cover today. So this is my favourite topic. So fraud, corruption and workplace misconduct. So we'll cover why be alert, not alarmed for fraud, corruption and workplace conduct, mainly because the great majority of people are going to do the right thing. But it's a risk area or areas that you need to be alert to just in case they don't. Or employees are preyed upon by fraudsters external to the organisation. We'll cover understanding why it occurs in these crisis times. So I'm putting COVID-19 in a similar situation to the global financial crisis, natural disasters. There's a lot of similarities with these things, even though it's slightly different. And I'll talk about some of the known occurring COVID-19 fraud and similar scams, including cyber fraud. At RSM, we have a cyber security partner, Darren Booth, and he looks after that area. I'm covering some of this where it overlaps with fraud, but certainly it's a whole different area and could be a webinar in its own right. And I'll talk about what can businesses do, including working from home risk mitigation. Next slide, thank you. So covering why be alert, not alarmed for fraud, corruption, workplace misconduct. So as I said, it is very similar to some of the other crisis events we've had globally. And you can see that fraudsters come out of the woodwork to prey on businesses and individuals in times of crisis because they see that opportunity. And they're hoping, of course, that internal controls are lax and the defences aren't there, or they're not practiced properly as we're all working from home or working in a different environment, or potentially with less internal controls in place. They can be circumvented for expediency to keep business processes operating, or for government assistance to the private sector. So local, state and Commonwealth government have been amazing trying to support business as much as possible. And some of these grants and funding, etc., can be taken advantage of by fraudsters. Management review may not be as vigilant due to distraction by COVID-19 and other management responsibilities. And what we'll talk about next is the fraud triangle is the best insight to the circumstances that lead to fraud, corruption and workplace misconduct. Next slide, please. So understanding why fraud occurs in a time of crisis. So this fraud triangle, if you have or haven't seen it before, is as relevant now as it was when it was developed in the 1950s by a criminologist called Dr. Donald R. Cressy. I don't know why, but in America they always use their middle initial and that's it. It's still just as relevant today, and there are three elements for fraud, corruption or workplace misconduct to occur. And if you take one of these elements away, it gets into prevention. So the three elements are as follows, depicted in that triangle. So motivation. So often that's through financial stress, hardship or job loss fear. So an employee might think, I'm going to lose my job. I've been here for 10 years. I'm going to take something before I go or commit a fraud because I know where the weaknesses are. Rationalisation. That's when someone says, I deserve it. I need extra money due to my hard work or loyalty. Or I'm just going to borrow from the organisation and gamble or invest or do whatever, and then I'll pay it back because everything will be fine when I pay it back. And the great majority of cases, it isn't fine. And the opportunity. So that is internal controls or management review are not as vigilant or diligent as they could be, and it slips through the cracks. So most of the time, the internal control framework and management review observe things that aren't right, report it, or attend to it and prevent some sort of fraud or corruption or workplace misconduct. But in this case, when motive, opportunity and rationalisation combine, you get the fraud, corruption or workplace misconduct. Next slide, please. So known occurring COVID-19 fraud scams and similar scams. So there's an absolute plethora of information coming out at the moment about scams, and particularly to do with the coronavirus pandemic. And certainly government, law enforcement, they do a great job. And if you go onto many of the websites, you'll see there's scam alerts and you can see as this is changing. So there can be outright theft and obtaining fraudulent benefits by whatever means, just while people are in a panic and internal controls aren't operating as effectively as they normally do. Of course, cyber fraud and cyber security scams are very commonplace generally, but they're absolutely spiking at the moment in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. So some terms you may or may not know. So phishing, and these are all to do with techniques purporting for fraudsters to purport to be from reputable companies to induce confidential, private information released without authorization or to infect a PC with a virus and other nefarious means. So phishing is via email. Phishing is via voice by phone. Smishing is via text, and I'll show you an example of a couple of smishing attempts on me personally that no doubt others get from time to time as well. Farming is via installing malicious code into a PC through clicking on a link, etc. So hence the reinforcement to staff of the proper cybersecurity workplace computer use policies and procedures are just so important. There's also investment scams of people saying, oh, invest in this and we can give you a better return than the stock market because it's plummeted, and we can give you 20% return within 6 months, and invest in this. It's the new face masks, you know, that will be used by everyone around the world. And if you invest now, you can make $1 million. So the old adage of if it looks too good to be true, it is too good to be true is very true here. So there's no such thing as an easy buck in my view. And I've certainly seen a lot of people fall victim to these scams who are trying to invest and get better returns on their money. Counterfeit or non-existent COVID-19 equipment. I've seen a lot of advertisements and LinkedIn exposure to some of these sort of things. So some of those are, you know, like oxygen machines that will prevent you from getting coronavirus, to solutions and tonics that'll prevent it ever happening in your household. And, you know, the list becomes endless. Fake online shopping sites requesting unusual payment methods. So there might be a site where you think, because we're all shopping online at the moment because we can't physically go to a lot of shops and buy things. And if you're like my household with 3 daughters, there's a lot of online shopping going on and deliveries to the front door. And so there can be fake online sites where you put in your payment details and you never get the product. And in fact, you may even have given enough information for a fake online shopping site to then use your credit card details to then purchase fraudulently other things unbeknown to you. So the old trick of if you can do a transaction without revealing your CVN code on the back of your credit card, that is good, because if someone has your CVN code and your name and your credit card number, they can basically do any online shopping. Unsolicited coronavirus-related emails. They could be a range of things, from purporting to be from the government saying, look, we're going to give you a one-off payment of $5,000. Please enter your details here and we'll transfer it to your bank account. They're all scams, and you need to double-check, triple-check what's going on, including from a business perspective. If that comes in from the tax office saying, we're going to give you a massive relief in tax, please put in your corporate details, and then that is stolen, and then identity theft or fraud can occur. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a couple of examples that came into my mobile phone from smishing attempts. So the one on the left is, and the phone number there is the number of the sender. And when you actually ring these numbers back, they don't answer. It says it's out of order, and you can't actually do anything. Because I tend to ring them back to ask what they're asking me about. So this one says your NAB, National Australia Bank ID, has been locked for security reasons. Heaven forbid. Please log in and verify your identity here at this link. Well, that's all good, but I don't have a NAB account. I bank with another bank. So I wasn't going to click on this link because no doubt it might have infected the device I was, receiving this on, or would ask me to input a whole lot of private information, which would then be stolen by fraudsters. So the one on the right is another example. So I've been very fortunate. I got this the other day saying you are due to receive an ATO refund of $1,786.51. Excellent. Visit that site and complete security check to claim refund, of course. But WTF is my response to that. What the fraud? So if anyone, and no, I don't think so. I certainly didn't, because it was a scam. So if anyone has me as a LinkedIn contact, you'll see that I send out a post very regularly of WTF, what the fraud, publicising a lot of fraud schemes that happen around the world and in Australia. So don't hesitate to link up with me on LinkedIn and you can receive those as well. So known occurring COVID-19 scams still. So there are scams to organise the early release of superannuation. So fraudsters have always preyed on the superannuation funds because it's got a ton of money, and if they can use identity fraud or other means to get funds, they will. And so, especially with the government declaring that there can be early release of superannuation for hardship, that exposes fraudsters externally to the opportunity to pretend they're somebody and try and get that early release deposited to them. So often a good preventative tip on this is to make sure that your letterbox is, if you receive things in the mail, such as a superannuation statement or other things, make sure your letterbox is locked and someone can't just obtain it after the postie delivers it. There can also be false vendors and a whole range of vendor or request for payment scams on businesses. So you can easily Google, but if you want any of these things that I refer to, don't hesitate just to email or contact me and I can provide them to you. This next one you can just Google, but New South Wales ICAC, the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission, has released a Managing Corrupt Conduct During the COVID-19 Outbreak document. It's literally just out and it's got some really good information in it. So I've got it here next to me, but some of the tips on procurement and purchasing, for example, the risks are high when you engage in emergency procurement. Agree to contract variations, make sure that's bona fide. Use direct negotiations and other exemptions to competitive procurement processes, they're risk areas. Another risk area is paying suppliers quickly, especially if they are small businesses. And rely on staff to purchase items used agency-issued credit cards. So just be wary of those sort of things, but please don't hesitate to, it's freely obtainable and downloadable by New South Wales ICAC to get that, which is pretty handy. So employees working from home. So we're now all working from home. There's a ton of risks. So, it might be shading your background so that I might have at the background an identity document framed, like a certificate of qualification or something similar, and some clever person crashes into a webinar or to some sort of video conference and sees that and enlarges it and grabs the details and uses it for nefarious means. So there's a ton. So it's a risk to be wary of, and there's a considerable amount of time we're all spending at home. And there's also a risk that employees may be doing non-employer related activities and not working the full day that they say they are. So that's another aspect that hopefully is not the case, but if it is, certainly there are surveillance that workplaces can do, whether it's just monitoring and managing output of tasks given so they can see that people are working, for example. So ensure IT and cyber security measures are up to date, like virus protection, firewalls, security patches, etc., and follow your IT policy and advice. The IT and the people and culture teams in all organisations have been working overtime and have been doing an amazing job in organisations to advise employees what is the safest way to operate. Be careful of security weaknesses. So Zoom video conferencing security weaknesses. We're on Zoom now, and that is all fine because this is a public webinar, and we don't mind if someone comes in and sees it. But you might be aware that Hamish out of Hamish and Andy has been spending a bit of a joke time in crashing into Zoom video meetings, video conferencing, and having a bit of a laugh. And that's all fine, but if you look at the media, the Australian Defence Forces have banned the use of Zoom because Hamish crashed one of their confidential military meetings, and it was a security risk. So it's just something to be wary of. As I said, watch what's in your background of your video conferencing. Could be photos, identity documents, all sorts of things. And be wary for unidentified meeting participants, and identify who they are. Say, there's someone who's anonymous, please identify who that is. And it might be one of your team who's using someone else's device to log in, but you can at least clarify. Next slide, please. Look at that, everyone. That is a sexy slide, that is. So there's a number of government organisations that are giving great advice on cyber safety. Interpol is one of those. I'd like to give due acknowledgement down the bottom there to Doug Witchie, who's from the cyber threat response area of Interpol. He's given us permission to put this on one of our slides. Interpol and other organisations do an amazing job in advising the public on how to keep cyber safe. So you can see the points there of backup online and offline files regularly and securely, strengthen your home network, use strong passwords, keep your software updated, or talk to your IT people about that. Manage social media profiles. So be very careful how you're using your social media, that others may see that. Check privacy and security settings, and avoid opening and delete suspicious emails or attachments. So like some of that phishing and smishing and those sort of techniques. Next slide, please. So what can businesses do, including working from home risk mitigation? So essentially stay ever vigilant and diligent, focusing on compliance, internal and external audit, and internal controls testing and strengthening. So don't let those things drop. Don't ignore the GRC, which is governance, risk and compliance requirements or practices that you would have normally had in place and should still have in place when you are in the office. For example, don't let your whistleblower program be ineffectual. We run a whistleblower program for clients of RSM, and certainly it's very effective in employees being able to speak up and raise things that they think aren't quite right or internal control weaknesses that the organisation should patch up with. Provide employees with tips and traps of which to be aware to avoid being a victim personally of COVID-19 fraud scams, which translates to being more alert in daily work duties. So, tell your staff, have awareness sessions about some of these things, the things we talked about today. Consider conducting a COVID-19 anti-fraud, corruption and workplace misconduct review. We're doing these for the moment with clients where it's like, well, what's the environment like at the moment? It's changed. Has our fraud and corruption risk profile changed? So I'm happy, do not forget about upskilling or continuous CPE development. So I'll go on to the next slide, please, about a certified fraud examiner course. So just to end up, RSM happens to be the exclusive authorised trainer for a global anti-fraud association called the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. It's got about 85,000 members globally and is the anti-fraud professional association for anti-fraud professionals like myself and yourself if you have a role or an interest in this area. So there's a certified fraud examiner credential, CFE, like CA, CPA for accountants or CIA for internal auditors. And it covers those sort of areas of investigation law, financial transactions and fraud schemes, and fraud prevention and deterrence. And so feel free to contact me or have a look at our RSM website for that course, which is going to be virtually run for the first time in July. It's a 4-day course run via a virtual medium. This case will be Microsoft Teams. Next slide, which I think is the end. So if you want to contact me or my second in charge, Malin Chef, please don't hesitate. And you've got all those details and don't hesitate to contact me. So I'd like to thank everyone for submitting their questions as well. And I might see if there's any questions for me to attend to. So I've got a question of what is the most common reaction to COVID-19 management you are seeing or hearing organisations get wrong or could be doing better? And by wide and far, it's the weaknesses to do with cyber security, which can then lead to fraud or some sort of contamination of companies' IT systems. And also, what are the significant examples of unintended consequences arising from organisations' responses to COVID-19? I'm not quite sure what that question is. You might want to just clarify a little bit as to what exactly that you mean by that. Or I don't know whether, Jacob, you might have a view on that as well.
Yeah, so I guess I can sort of link the two questions together. So essentially, unintended consequences by not adopting agility and flexibility in your approach to reacting to COVID-19. You can sort of be stuck in the ways of resistant to change and stuck in the ways you usually do things, and then wait it out until something changes. So I guess the advice from us is to be as proactive as possible and make sure you are preempting government decisions as opposed to reacting to government decisions, or reacting to actual flow-on effects of this on your organisation.
Thanks, Jacob. And I invite anybody, Jacob and I invite anybody to ask any questions in the Q&A so that we can answer those in the final few minutes.
One question I also got is in terms of what are some of the strategies you recommend to manage your staff remotely? Again, it's obviously you're restricted to whatever restrictions are in place, but it's utilising the virtual mechanisms that you have in place and changing the way you work with your teams. There's another question here.
Well, Jacob, I might add to that of course, depending on the state or territory you are in around Australia, the laws change, but in some locations, it is absolutely fine for employers to be surveilling their employees' use of IT. And so you can actually monitor what they're doing and how long they're online, etc., if it's legally allowable. So it depends on the state. And also, I'm a great believer in tasking people and saying, well, you've got 3 days to do this, and I look forward to seeing the output of that, which is reviewed. And so depending on the work function someone has, the output can show the effort and the work that people are doing, that they are working from home effectively.
And one question was in relation to what advice can we give on how businesses should link COVID-19 risks, the register, to business strategic risks? Well, given the impact of COVID-19, these, as I was talking about, looking at the potential long-term effects, these risks should transition into your strategic risks. This is where potentially your strategic objectives may need to change in response to recovering your operations to recover from a disruption event like this. So it should be being discussed and it should be reflected in your in conversations at the executive management team level, obviously, and at the board level as well. There was one question for you, Roger, about superannuation?
Yes. So, well, there's a couple actually, isn't there? So, our ICT area is concerned using Zoom. Should we be? Yes, you should be. So, you can literally Google and get details on the security weaknesses that are in Zoom. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be used, but what it means is that you need to know the restrictions from a security perspective so that you use it in a way that doesn't expose your organisation. Then a question about some private devices are being used to work from home. What are the strategies planned to attack out of these devices when work is normalised? So, you know, in an ideal world, you'd be using work devices that are controlled by the systems and preventative measures of your own IT areas, or they've got encryption and a whole range of things in logging on from a personal computer via a VPN. So I'd certainly advise you to talk to your IT function within your organisation about how best to protect yourself. There's a question about Microsoft Teams, and one unintended consequence of working from home is that water cooler chats and knowledge is falling away. Tools like Microsoft Teams are being used to compensate for this, example, customer-facing team channels. So, you know, we're certainly at RSM doing professional services for clients. It's business as usual, but we're working in a virtual and a remote way. So using some of these media like Microsoft Teams, like Zoom, Skype, etc., it's important from an internal and external perspective. Internal, to actually keep your teams connected. My own team, for example, has a virtual drinks for half an hour on a Friday night, which is a video conference drinks where we have finished the day and it's just a social catch up and a team catch up. And of course, using these media to interact with clients, customers, etc. So another question is, unrealistic workload and remote working the perfect storm for performance reporting fraud? And yes, that's certainly a risk, and any of this data information should be verified, checked, and professional skepticism should be at its utmost in these times.
All right.
Fantastic. We'll just give people just one more last chance to submit any last minute questions while we have both Roger and Jacob on the line. And as they come through, feel free to interrupt me to answer those if you like, gents. But what I just want to let you know, just to say thank you very much for joining us for today's session. Post the conclusion of the webinar, all of our attendees will receive a short survey just to provide your feedback on the session, and we'd really appreciate if you took a moment of your time to complete that. That will just give us some feedback for our presenters on the topic and any other suggestions of other webinars that you might like to hear about in the future, so we can deliver that information to you in a timely manner. We will also be providing in a follow-up email to all of our attendees a recording of the session, so if you wanted to play back any responses or any slides, you can with the commentary from the presenters. We will also provide a copy of the PowerPoint slides for your reference, as well as all of the questions and answers. We will collate those into a single document and provide a link to those, so if you missed any of them or want to refer to them in a future date, you're able to do so. Fantastic. So I think in the interest of time, we will wrap up this session today. Thank you again, gents, for your presentations. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Be safe. See ya.